Welcome to the Wisconsin Podcast. I'm Craig Sauer. On this podcast, we talk Wisconsin things, everything from media, sports, culture, nature, politics, and more. This week, I learned more about the UW Urban Canid Project, which is working to study red foxes and coyotes living in the city of Madison. The project aims to investigate the ways in which these canids live in the urban landscape and how humans can coexist with them. I talked with the project's leader, David Drake. Drake is a professor and extension wildlife specialist in the Department of Forest and Wildlife Ecology. His work focuses on wildlife and wildlife damage management in human-dominated landscapes. I stopped by Drake's UW-Madison office to learn more about his work. How did this project get started? Why do this project?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's a common question. So it actually was a pretty organic start. I've got an extension appointment along with my research appointment, and so I get contacted by a lot of people with wildlife questions, just that run the gamut. And there's a part of campus here in Madison that's called the Lakeshore Nature Preserve, and it's the wild or natural part of campus. So if you're familiar with the University of Wisconsin-Madison campus, it contains Picnic Point and Biocore Prairie and some of the areas along the South Shore of Lake Mendota and things like that. And so the previous manager of the Lakeshore Nature Preserve contacted me one day and said that she had been getting contacted by quite a few people out around the Picnic Point area, that as they were running through there, walking through there, and especially if they had a dog with them, that they were seeing an increasing number of coyotes or having an increasing number of coyote interactions where the people thought the coyotes were getting a little bit close. And so I said, well, we'd be glad to come out and see what's going on. And I had an undergraduate student at the time who was looking for a project. And I said, well, why don't we go put some wildlife cameras up and see, make sure we're verifying that they are coyotes and things like that. And sure enough, we were finding coyote tracks and, scat, and we got plenty of coyotes on cameras and things like that. So it just evolved from there. And I had another undergraduate student who was interested in an independent research project. And I was interested in finding out a little bit more about the coyotes. At that time, I said, well, why don't we try to trap a couple? And I bought a couple of radio collars. And so why don't we put some radio collars on coyotes out at Picnic Point, just see what the heck they're doing. And about that same time, we got that project going. Red fox started showing up on campus, and we're becoming a kind of a big deal that people were seeing fox regularly, and we're getting pretty close to the fox. And so I said, well, let's try to catch some fox as well, and we'll see how the fox and coyote are interacting here in the city. And so that's how the project started.
Those are animals that are generally pretty elusive to be able to see them regularly. That must have been something that caught your attention then.
Well, most of what I do, or most of my focus, is on urban wildlife management. So it's how do animals live in human-dominated landscapes, live amongst the human population, how do they navigate that area, things like that. So I'm interested in that generally. And what you typically see is wildlife species that are in municipal boundaries or what we call human-dominated landscapes, cities, urban, suburban areas, however you want to classify it, that those animals typically have more encounters with humans than the same type of animal that you might find out in the country or in non-urban or rural areas. And what happens is as these animals are living amongst us, over time, they habituate or they start to get used to us because as they start encountering us, rarely do bad things happen to the animals. Nobody shoots at them. Nobody, tries to scare them away. A lot of times the animals are operating on the landscape at night, and so we're in our houses and or if we're out under the cover of darkness, it's not as easy to see them. And so these animals get used to being around us, and the more they get used to being around us, then they start to kind of lose their fear of humans. And as that occurs, then they get a little bit bolder and they get a little bit closer to us. And all of a sudden, then we start getting these encounters where you do see things like coyotes and fox and if you go to Los Angeles or Phoenix, you see bobcats regularly, things like that. The things you normally wouldn't expect to see in the city, these animals are very adaptable and they start showing up in the city. And not only do they show up in the cities, but they also are in areas where people are able to encounter them and view them and things like that. So it was not, I guess, unusual for something like that to occur, but it sure is fun.
What did you want when you first started the project? What central questions did you have that you wanted to answer when you started to look into this?
Coyotes in the cities have been studied for a long time, and the longest running urban coyote project has been conducted by a colleague of mine out of Ohio State, Stan Garrett, and he's been studying coyotes in the Chicago area since 2000, so about 17 years. Coyote projects have been going on in Los Angeles and New York City, Phoenix, other areas around the country. So it would be interesting to study coyotes here in Madison, but I knew that we weren't going to find anything that other people had not already found from an urban standpoint. That was one of the reasons that it was so intriguing to include the red fox in this study. Very, very, very few people in North America study urban red fox. We're one of the first research projects in North America to study urban red fox. So that was one of the interesting study questions. But the other real interesting question is that dynamic between coyotes and red fox. So if you go out into the country, or where there are not a lot of people, typically where you have coyotes, you do not have many, if any, red fox. So coyotes are about 3 times the size of a red fox. And if the coyote or when the coyote catches the red fox, typically they'll kill that animal to limit competition for a limited resource, be it food, den sites, whatever the case might be. So we wanted to look at that interaction between red fox and coyotes in the city, which has never been looked at before. And so that was the main overriding question for my previous graduate student. And then we also have some other questions where we're looking at the health of these animals. We're looking at how these animals interact with human beings, citizen science. There's a citizen science component and things like that. And now that we're starting to answer some of those questions, we're moving on to the question about what is actually the driver that does allow these animals to coexist in the city where they don't necessarily coexist in a non-city area.
I imagine a lot of people who contacted you initially were kind of maybe concerned. They're out. You mentioned they're out walking their dog and they see a coyote or a fox and they're like, "Oh, is my animal at risk? Am I at risk?" I imagine that's one of those central questions. And what would be the answer to that question?
Yeah, that is a central question, and a lot of people are curious about that. And it really depends on the species. So, with red fox, red fox are about 15 pounds at the largest. Not much heavier than a fat house cat. They're a little bit taller, obviously. People love red fox generally. There are a few people when the red fox may raid their backyard chicken coop that people aren't so happy with them. But generally, people are very, very happy with the red fox. Typically, in Madison, at least, people see red fox more frequently than they see coyote. So there's a familiarity there. Not only is the animal a little bit smaller, it's not as threatening as a coyote, or not as perceived as threatening as a coyote, and they're seeing them more often. So people are a little bit more used to seeing red fox, a little bit more familiar with them, and things like that. Coyotes are about 45 pounds. A large size coyote can be upwards of 45 pounds. Coyotes tend to more commonly attack and kill pets, dogs, cats, things like that. And traditionally, if you look through folklore or history, the human relationship with the coyotes is a little bit more on the dark side, if you will, than with fox. We kind of, if you just look at like the way that Walt Disney portrays coyotes versus red fox, for example. So coyotes are a little bit, people are not as overwhelmingly in favor of coyotes. Some people are trepidatious about them. Some people like them. Some people are not quite sure what to think about them. And typically, if a coyote or a coyote pack or a coyote or two start killing dogs in the city of Madison, then the favorability rating for coyotes tends to go down, as you'd expect. But that's one of the other goals of this project, is to try to increase people's knowledge about these animals, increase their opinion about these animals, and increase the tolerance for both of these species in the city, because these animals are not leaving the city. They're here for good, and we've got to figure out a way to live with them, whether we want to or not.
So have cities around the state or other urban areas approached you about, well, we got these coyotes, we're seeing these coyotes or foxes in the area, and we're kind of concerned about it. Should we, hunt them, get them out of the city? Do you get a lot of questions like that?
Yeah, we do. We a couple of years ago, we went over to Milwaukee, for example. We got invited over there by the Milwaukee County Parks to go over and help them with the management situation. We wrote a coyote management plan for Milwaukee. We went over and trapped a few coyotes for them and ear tagged them as a kind of a trap and tag program. So because they were having coyotes that were starting to attack pets, and we were trying to identify the aggressive coyotes, because typically the entire pack's not aggressive. It might just be one or two individuals. And so we went over and did that with Milwaukee. And an interesting side note to that is last spring I got called by a biologist, federal wildlife biologist, who was permanently stationed at Chicago O'Hare Airport, and he had just recently killed a coyote that had an ear tag in it. And they were wondering if it was one of our coyotes. Stan Garrett with the Chicago Coyote Project had already said, no, that was not one of our coyotes that came into O'Hare. And sure enough, it was one of the coyotes we tagged in Milwaukee the previous winter or two. And he had made his way from where we trapped him in the Milwaukee County Park System to Chicago O'Hare, where he got shot, was a straight line distance of 83 miles. And so he had moved 83 miles south. And what was really interesting to us was that he had gone from one urban area and he was seeking out another urban area, because he had clearly, if you're familiar with that distance between Milwaukee and Chicago O'Hare, there's a lot of farmland, and he could have easily settled someplace in that farmland if he was allowed to by other existing coyote packs. But he continued to move on and was seeking out an urban area, which was pretty interesting to us. So yeah, we are contacted by other cities in other cities in Wisconsin. And we're starting to collaborate with other people around the country now. So I've got a collaboration for a coyote project with a colleague in Los Angeles. And, we don't do too much with Stan Garrett in Chicago, but we certainly share information and things like that. So yeah, it's been a wonderful collaboration, a great excuse to network with a lot of people.
What are we finding about why these animals end up in cities? Why are they not, settling in that farmland? What brings them to the cities?
Yeah, well, they certainly are settling in the farmland as well. And so when we think about urban wildlife, a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, the city is moving out to where the wildlife live. And that is certainly true. As cities expand and annex land and things like that, they are moving out into previously undeveloped areas. There's no doubt about that. With coyote and fox, it's probably more likely that these animals have moved into the city more than the city has moved out to them. And what's allowed that to happen is that we classify these animals in a whole bunch of different ways. I mean, they're mammals, they're fur bearers, they're carnivores because they eat a lot of meat, but more accurately, they're omnivores. And so they eat a variety of diet, from plant material to nuts, berries, insects, as well as rabbits, squirrels, mice, things like that. So they're diet generalists, for one thing, and because of that, they can range across a wide swath of the landscape and find food to eat. But they're also what we call habitat generalists, and so they are equally at home in cities as they are in farmland, as they are on the edges of woodlands, in areas that might be fallow, for example, abandoned, things like that. And because of that habitat generality, that also is what allows them to move into cities, because they can make as good a living in the city as they can out in farmland or in rural, undeveloped areas.
So coyotes are a pack animal. Mm-hmm. I don't know about foxes. Or they're in packs as well?
They are. We typically call it more of a family structure. Okay. We do refer to the coyotes as packs, and the fox is more of a family structure.
So do they generally move into cities as a pack or as a family?
That's a good question, and I'm not sure that we know that exactly. So what typically happens with these animals, especially in non-urban areas, is once the males hit about 2 years of age, they get kicked out of that pack, and maybe even at the end of the first year, something like that, they get kicked out of that pack, so they don't compete for dominance with the dominant male, and they're not competing for breeding and things like that because they don't want to inbreed that pack. So typically what would happen is that those younger males would get kicked out, and then they either have to go establish their own pack or they have to go join a different pack. And so most likely what's happening is they move into the city is it's probably individual animals, and then they start finding each other and establish a pack. And so you'll get a dominant male, female pair, and then they'll start breeding and get subordinates, and the pack will start developing like that. And the same thing for fox. You have a dominant male and female, and usually you have a helper fox or two, and that's that family structure that you'd see. So it's probably unlikely that they move in as a pack, but I don't know the answer to that question definitively.
So you've been doing this project since about 2015, I believe.
Yeah, 14, 15.
14, 15. So about 3-4 years now. How many animals have you trapped and tagged during that time? And kind of what have there been some interesting findings once you've been tracking those animals that you've tagged?
Yeah, good questions. So let's see, we've caught about, not counting the coyotes we caught in Milwaukee, we've caught about close to 25 coyotes so far, and probably close to 20 fox, something like that. So some of the interesting things, we, with some regularity, catch the same animal multiple times. So a lot of times people think, well, these animals they're not easy to catch, for one thing. They're smart animals, and you're always trying to stay a step ahead of them and try to outsmart them, just like, they don't know the traps are out there, but they're pretty smart animals, and especially in their own area, they know what's going on. But we've caught the same fox. We caught one fox 3 times. We've caught 3 or 4 fox twice. We've caught 4 or 5 coyotes twice. And one of the things that was really interesting about that is we just caught a coyote here at Picnic Point last December 2017. And that we actually caught 2 coyotes at Picnic Point in December 2017. Both those animals we had previously caught, and both of those animals we had already previously radio collared. One of those 2 animals was the very first coyote we ever caught in this project 4 years ago. And so that was really neat to see him again. That was pretty interesting. So that was kind of neat. Another interesting thing, again, with the Picnic Point pack is, 2.5 years ago, something like that. My graduate student at the time, he couldn't find one of the collars or one of the animals out of the Picnic Point pack that we had radio collared, and so he just starts driving in ever increasing circles to try to pick up the radio signal. And he's out, if you're familiar with the Madison area, he's out in West Madison at the Beltline, where kind of Madison and Middleton meet, and all of a sudden he's starting to pick up a faint beep on the radio, and so he keeps going west, and sure enough, he picked up this female coyote out on County Road P, kind of between Mount Horeb and Cross Plains, if you're familiar with those areas, and she had moved about 20 miles west, and that's not a great distance for coyotes to move, but she had gone out there, and so the next day we went out to pick her up and found her out on a farm. And then about a day or 2 later, I got a call from the Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources, one of the conservation wardens, and said that he had gotten a call that a farmer had shot her out on his farm, which was legal to do. But when he went to see the animal, he saw this ear tags and a radio collar, and he called us, and we went to pick her up and got the radio collar back and did a necropsy, kind of an animal autopsy on her. And so that was kind of interesting that she had moved. It would have been neat to see what would happen if she hadn't gotten shot, if she was going to come back to the pack or not. But that was kind of interesting as well.
That brings up another, I guess, question for me is when you trap these animals, you do some health tests, I'm guessing. Have you figured out anything about these animals that are living in urban areas, their health versus animals that live in, more rural areas, more out in the country? Yeah. Is there a difference in their health?
So we have not gone too far into the literature on this. I'm familiar with some studies on the health of these animals, especially as you go out into the western United States. So what we were looking for was things like canine distemper, canine parvovirus, lepto, adenovirus, things like that. And we have not found much of that in either the fox or the coyotes. I mean, there's a few animals that have been exposed to that. They've been able to develop an immunity and are just fine. So what we suspect is the animals in the city are probably healthier than the animals out in the country, simply because the animals in the city are in good nutritional health. And every animal we've caught is full-bodied. I mean, they're not hurting for a meal. They're not fat by any stretch of the imagination, but they're certainly in nutritional health. And typically, the more nutritionally healthy you are, the healthier your immune system is, and the healthier the immune system, then the more you can fight off diseases and things like that. So that has kind of been, I don't want to say boring, because it's good that these animals are healthy, but I suspect that they're healthier than their counterparts that would be in the rural area, simply because the rural coyotes and rural fox are typically a little bit more lean. They don't have as much food to eat. They're not nutritionally healthy and things like that. What is really interesting to us, and what is showing a stronger signal than the other diseases I just mentioned that we look for, is Lyme disease and heartworm. And so Lyme disease is a tick-borne disease, obviously, and heartworm is a mosquito-borne disease. And so we're finding that about 45% of the coyotes that we're testing actually have heartworm, and about 55% of the coyotes have Lyme disease. Only one of the fox we've ever, of all the fox we've caught, only one has tested positive for Lyme disease, and none has ever tested positive for heartworm. And what we think is going on, and this is what we're starting to look into now, is that the coyotes in our study, they tend to concentrate most of their time in urban green spaces. So places like the University of Wisconsin Arboretum, Picnic Point, and things like that. The fox tend to spend most of their time in more of a developed landscape. So where we trap fox, a lot of times they're in people's yards, because that's where the fox are. And so where people are, we don't, humans tend not to tolerate very well ticks or mosquitoes. And so we don't have a lot of very good tick habitat in residential areas, because we don't have overgrown vegetation. We don't have a lot of shade, shady areas, dark shady areas, things like that. And there's not a lot of standing water in the landscape. You think about a rain event, that water runs into the storm sewer pretty quick and gets off the land. But if you go into these urban areas like Picnic Point or the Arboretum, there's a lot of very wooded areas. You have a lot of shade, and so there's a lot of standing water. So what we think is happening is, because the fox are associating more with human habitat or human developed landscape, that they are not as exposed to mosquitoes and ticks, and because of that, they're not as susceptible to Lyme disease or heartworm. On the other hand, coyotes are in these natural areas where you've got good tick habitat, good mosquito habitat, and as a result, they're exposed to ticks and mosquitoes a lot more commonly, and are picking up the diseases as a result of that. So that's been kind of interesting.
I live in Madison, and I go to the Arboretum all the time, and I go out to Picnic Point all the time. But I don't know that I've ever seen a coyote in the city. I don't think I've maybe seen the tail of a fox darting between a trail one time. But this is over years, so I don't see these animals a lot, but I know they're there at a certain point. Do you have an idea on scale, how many are living in the city in Madison?
Good question, and the answer is no. We're ear tagging both red fox and coyote. We've stopped ear tagging fox, but we do still ear tag coyote. And a component of our project here is assistant science-based reporting of coyotes and fox when people see them in the city. And what we were hoping to get is that people would report fox and coyote, and we would get a ratio set up between the number of reports of animals that had ear tags compared to the number of reports of animals that did not have ear tags, and then that would allow us to calculate a population estimate. Unfortunately, we were not getting enough reports with animals with ear tags, either because people weren't seeing the ear tags, or they were only seeing animals without ear tags, or whatever the case might be. And so we didn't get enough of a report, enough frequency of reports with ear-tagged animals to actually develop a population estimate. So with that being said, my best guess, we think there's probably 4 to 7 coyotes per pack. And in our study area, which is the west and south side of Madison, we know of, we're almost certain there's only 3 packs in our study area. So that would be at the most 21 animals right there, coyotes. And then if you go north and east in the city, there's probably another 2 to 4 packs over there. So probably at the most there might be 50 coyotes in the city, I would guess, but I don't. That's just a educated guess. The fox population seems to be much more variable. So sometimes, when we first started this project, we knew between 2 families of fox, we knew of 17 different fox on campus alone. Now there might be, at the height of breeding season, there might be 10 fox in our study area at the time, at this current time. So we don't, for some reason, the fox population seems more variable. And I have really no guess at all as to how many fox might be in the city, because that population is moving around. The territories don't seem to be as established as coyote territories, and the population numbers in terms of reports of animals we're getting it varies quite a bit as well.
You mentioned the citizen science component of it. Are you still looking for people to report these things?
Yeah, absolutely.
So to be able to do that, you have to be able to identify these animals, and if you're just seeing them in the dark or something, you might mistake one for like just a stray dog or a stray, a small dog.
Yeah.
So do you have any tips for traits on these animals that you would point out that would be like, that's identifiably a coyote or a fox versus a dog?
Yeah. Yep, sure. Good question. And that's one of the things we do have to be a little bit careful of with our citizen science reporting data, is that when people say it's a coyote, it actually is a coyote. And there are occasionally mistaken identities made and things like that. But what we try to do is match up our radiotelemetry data with iNaturalist data, so that we know, and we kind of divide the city into cells. So we can say, well, we know that there was a coyote in this cell at some point because we tracked it there. And so it's a good chance that people are, if they report a coyote in the cell, it's a good chance it probably is a coyote in that cell. And with coyotes, you are more likely to perhaps mistake a coyote for a dog, a German Shepherd, or something like that. But if you see coyotes out, and mostly they're nocturnal, so they're active at night. If you see an animal running across the street in the middle of the night and you don't see a human being associated with that animal, most likely it's a coyote, because otherwise it could just be, there are occasionally stray dogs, but not many in the city. And it's rare that dogs escape their owners. They might for a little bit, but they're not going to be out running around on a regular basis or whatever the case might be. So it's probably, most people that are seeing coyotes are probably truthful in what they're seeing and reporting. And, coyotes are kind of a grizzled gray animal. They've got a real narrow snout, pointed ears, kind of triangular ears. A lot of times the tail is kind of held straight out when they run. And coyotes, coyotes move differently than a domestic dog does, even though they're all in the same family. In terms of red fox, there's not a whole lot of other animals in the city that you would confuse with a red fox per se. And red fox can come in different colorations, but most of the time their coat is red. And then the true defining characteristic on a red fox would be you'd have a white tip to the tail of that animal. And so those are some of the things you might look for. And typically red fox have black legs that contrast with that beautiful red body and then that red tip to the tail.
Why did you get into this field, this profession in general? Why come into this studying of animals, the studying of animals and civilization and that kind of interplay? Why did that interest you?
Yeah. Well, I've always been interested in science. My dad was a geologist. He's retired now. My mom was a science teacher. So I've always been interested in science and thought I would do something in the science world. And I didn't deviate too much from wanting to major in biology. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it. And just through a series of experiences, my kind of career path evolved. And then when I finished my PhD, my first job in academia was with Rutgers University at New Jersey. We used to live out east, where I grew up. And with Rutgers, it is in the most urban state in the country. Rutgers, I think, New Jersey, has, I can't remember, it's 18 or 21 counties. Every one of the counties in New Jersey is considered an urban county. So it is by far the most urbanized state in the country. And so when I got to Rutgers, I got exposed to urbanization. First and foremost, it was just upfront in your face. And so there aren't a lot of people in the wildlife biology field doing urban stuff. And so I thought, well, this is kind of an interesting thing. So I started doing some of that. It was more on the wildlife damage side than it was the wildlife management side. But that was the first real introduction to urban wildlife, and I kind of started getting a hold of that. And then I've always had this thread through my career of urban ecology. And then when I got here, some of these projects just started presenting themselves, and I kind of grabbed hold. But the thing that interests me so much about the urban landscape is, roughly 85% of Americans live in cities. They live in an urbanized or suburban type area. And so that is where most of the interactions between humans and wildlife take place. And not all of the interactions are positive. I mean, there's raccoons that occupy people's chimneys or bats in the attic or whatever the case is. And people don't welcome those animals in, and they don't necessarily want them there. So there are negative interactions or negative, meetings between humans and wildlife. But most of the interactions are taking place in those urbanized areas. And if we want to impact people's opinions and change people's behavior about how to interact with wildlife from more of a positive standpoint, I think it behooves us as wildlife ecologists to work in that urban environment. And like I said, there's not a lot of people doing it, so it's kind of nice that there's not a ton of competition for it, and it's just a fun place to do it. It really is.
So you've been working in this field for a while, and do you have just an overall thought on how humans should approach living around animals? And I mean, what is kind of the overall theory or message that you have for people regarding the urbanization of animals and the intersection of the two?
I think one thing is get outside. If you look at the statistics, we are an urban population, and we're also if you want to think of it like a captive population. We're inside our houses. If we're not at work, we're inside our houses either because we're so busy just trying to get dinner on the table for our family, and we're running a hectic life, or especially for the younger generation, they're tied to some kind of an electronic device. It used to be the TV, now it's phones or computers or whatever, laptops, tablets, whatever. So put all of that down and get outside, I think, would be the first thing. And a lot of people have lost their familiarity with being outside. So when they go outside and they see a animal, free-ranging wildlife, I think a lot of people are not quite sure what to think about that. I think it probably raises the anxiety level for some people. It makes people nervous, especially the bigger the animal is. Like a coyote, I think a lot of people initially would perceive that animal as a threatening animal, whether it is or not in reality. And most of the time the animals are just moving through the landscape, and they don't care if you're there or not. They're not intended to hurt you. I think the animals are here. They're in the city. We're in the city. We're not leaving. The animals aren't leaving. So we better figure out how to best live together. And one of the things is, one of the goals of our project here is to educate people about specifically coyotes and red fox, but we do a lot of stuff about urban wildlife in general, trying to educate people about the birds they might see, the mammals they might see. We don't see as many reptiles or amphibians, but occasionally you'll see turtles or frogs or, the rare snake, things like that. So we try to educate people about that. And then the other thing to do is there's a lot of habitat that is not maximizing its potential to benefit wildlife, and in particular yards. So we do a lot of education and outreach extension in terms of helping people create and enhance and maintain wildlife habitat in their own yard, so that you can attract wildlife that normally wouldn't be there if the habitat wasn't there. But as you do that, it beautifies your yard. It can increase your property values. It's good for your mental health. It's much nicer to look out over a beautiful native flower garden than it is just turf and nothing else. And so we spend a lot of time trying to educate people, increase knowledge about these animals, and also change behavior, so that not only are you not attracting animals to your yard, so that and exacerbating a negative situation, but you're attracting animals to your yard, and it's a positive situation for people and the animals themselves.
So it's a matter of coexisting and appreciating versus killing and exterminating. Yep. Is that kind of the overall message?
That's it. And I'm not sure in the city that people, I'm not sure the first reaction is, hey, let's kill this animal, as much as it is, I just don't want the animal here. It makes me nervous. I don't know what to do. So I just have the animal go away. We're out in the country. Sometimes the first reaction is, well, let's grab the gun and we'll go take care of the animal on our own. It's illegal to discharge a firearm in most cities, so that's not a common reaction for a lot of people. But I think a lot of people, with a little education, explaining why is the animal here, reassuring people that the animal's not going to hurt you, and then trying to work with the homeowner so that the animal can still be in the yard, but not inside the attic or inside the chimney or inside the house, and make sure that all the access points are sealed up and things like that. That goes a long way.
So I imagine you do a lot of like roadshow, go around the state and talking to people, giving presentations on various things. Do you really enjoy that aspect of your job, being able to go out and just like kind of be among people and answer their questions and just educate in a different forum?
Yeah, so that's the extension side of my job, is doing that. And yeah, I do. I very much enjoy interacting with people, talking to people, answering their questions, sharing information, and hopefully trying to incentivize or encourage people to do something different, so that they can actually enjoy the wildlife that is living around them. They can gain a little bit of knowledge, and then hopefully do something good for the wildlife.
What are some of the best questions that you've gotten when you've been out talking to people?
Probably, I mean, a very common question is, hey, I have a picture of an animal, or I saw a track. What is this? So they just want some verification that if they have a guess that it really is that animal, or they want some positive identification about that animal. And then a lot of the questions are, what are these animals doing here? Why are they here? Why are they living in my attic, for example, or and what can I do about it, type thing. So those are some of the good questions. And it's nice to say, occasionally you'll see some pretty interesting things, like pictures people have gotten. There was out of Mazomanie, which isn't too far west of Madison. A family showed me a video of a bobcat mom and some kits that she had that were running through their backyard on a regular basis. That was super cool to see, and you get pictures of mink in the city and other things like that, animals you don't see a lot, but are common denizens of the city. So that's fun.
Trapping these animals, how do you trap them? How do you, when you're in the city, where do you how do you lay the traps? Like, who do you work with? Mm-hmm. I mean, how do you actually catch them? And then what's it just like to be among them and be kind of close to them, mm-hmm. in that situation? Obviously they're probably like sedated when you're, what is it like to just be that close to those animals in mm-hmm. that situation?
Yeah, it's fun. It is a lot of fun. So, so we trap the animals using what's called a cable restraint trap. Some people refer to it as a snare, but it's not a snare because it's not a killing trap. It's a live trap. There's two general ways you would catch these animals. Typically, is either one is with a foothold trap, or one is with a cable restraint. We only use cable restraints on our project for a couple of reasons. So most of the time, most of our trapping is sometime between November and March, in the winter season. For foothold traps, you have to actually dig that trap into the ground and bury it under the soil. And so in the wintertime, when we have a traditional winter and we have frozen soil, it's really hard to do that. With the cable restraint, it's much easier to anchor that trap in the ground, for one thing. So that's one of the reasons we use cable restraints. The other reason we use cable restraints is depending on which species we're trying to catch, a fox or a coyote, we have got maybe, I don't know, 8 inches to 12-inch diameter loop that the animal puts its head through to catch that animal. On a foothold, you might have a 2-inch diameter target area that the animal has to step in order to trigger the trap. So we've got a much better chance of catching an animal from a surface area standpoint using the cable restraint. So that's the other reason we use it. And the last reason we use it is we trap in some very, very urban areas. And we've trapped on campus here at the UW campus, where sometimes we have tens of thousands of people probably going 10 yards away from our trap, something like that, depending on where we're trapping. And a lot of times we trap where people are walking their dogs, and people are supposed to keep their dogs on leash, but a lot of people don't. And the domestic dogs are going to track the same place that coyotes and fox will track. And so we have not, in over 5,000 plus trap nights, we've never caught a dog. And we don't ever intend to catch a dog the way we set our traps and where we set them and things like that. Our goal is only to catch coyote and fox. But on the off chance we catch a dog, it is much less traumatic for the pet owner to get their dog out of a cable restraint than it is out of a foothold trap. Neither trap's going to hurt the dog at all. But with a cable restraint, it's like a choke collar. All the pet owner has to do is loosen the cable and remove it from the animal's head. With the foothold trap, they have to manipulate springs and jaws and all sorts of other things like that. And the pet owner, that's going to be trauma to the pet owner, not the pet. So that's the reason we use cable restraints. So Then we'll set these traps where the animals are coming and going. We'll look for their trails, and typically the trails are either off the beaten path, or we only set on trails that are off the beaten path, so we don't catch people, we don't catch dogs, we don't catch non-target animals, things like that. And then once we've caught an animal, we will slide what's called a pull noose over the animal's head to control the animal. And then another person will go around to the back leg and will hand inject a sedative combination into the animal. And then we will remove the pull noose and we back off for about 10 minutes, let the sedative work. And then once the animal's sedated, we'll go and look at the eyes and the teeth. That gives us a gross idea about the general health of the animal. Teeth also give us a gross idea about, are they a subadult or are they an adult, things like that. And once we've done that, we'll put eye drops in the eyes to make sure the eyes stay lubricated under sedation. We put a muzzle on the animal so that in case it does wake up while we're still processing the animal, we control it safely without it biting us. We weigh the animal. We look over the overall body condition. We draw blood out of one of the front legs. We take a cotton swab of the nasal passage. We take a cotton swab of the rectal passage. We collect feces. And then for coyotes, we'll ear tag them. And for both coyotes and fox, we'll put a radio collar around the neck. And then after we've done all that, we've cleaned up the trapping area, gotten all of our supplies and stuff out of the way. Then we'll reverse the animal with a different type of drug. And then we stay in the area until the animal's up and has removed itself from the trap site under its own power, just to make sure the animal's okay. And then once that happens, then we'll go our way, the animal goes its way, and then for the next 5 days, we'll pick that animal up on the radio at least 3 times over the next 5 days to make sure the animal's alive and doing well, and we know where the animal is. And then we'll pick the animal up at least once a week for the rest of that animal's life or the rest of the life of the collar, whichever expires first.
So what's the future of this project? How long are you going to be doing this, and kind of what are your goals going forward?
Well, I maybe have, 12, 13 years left in my career before I retire. I'd like to keep this project going. As long as we can keep money coming in and keep getting grants and things like that, I can keep this project going as long as we can because it's fascinating. It is absolutely fascinating. My previous graduate student kind of answered the question about can these animals coexist in the urban areas, and yes, they certainly can. So my new graduate student is going to start looking at what's the mechanism or the driver that allows that to happen. She's looking at the amount of food on the landscape in an urban area versus a rural area to see, because we think food is what's driving this. In an urban area where there's just an abundance of food, these animals can share that abundant resource. They don't have to compete for a limited resource like the animals do in the rural area. So that's what we're going to start looking at. And at some point, I probably will stop trapping coyotes because we're not learning anything new from the coyote standpoint that hasn't already been determined or found out by some other researchers in the country here. But we will continue with the red fox because not many people are doing it. There's a lot about the fox we don't know. Like I mentioned, the population seems variable. It seems very much more dynamic than the coyotes, things like that. So that's an additional future direction for sure. We'd like to get GPS collars instead of what we've been using, or VHF, or very high frequency collars. GPS collars will allow us to have more refined location data because we know that these animals can coexist, but we don't have really good data about daily coexistence, and we want to learn more about that from the GPS collars. And then the other thing is with citizen science, we want to delve into that a little bit more. So we looked at radiolocation data and overlaid that with iNaturalist data, and it matched up roughly about 65% of the time. But if we can get it up into the 90%, where we know that we're getting a comprehensive coverage of our study area and we're getting good, accurate accounts, observational accounts of these animals, then what we'd like to do is just ear tag animals. Don't radio call them again. Just trap them, ear tag them, and let them go. And then rely on the public to share the location data with us. And that would save us a tremendous amount of expense with the radio collars, with the labor involved to track the animals and things like that. And the other nice thing about citizen science, it hooks the public. So they get involved, they buy in, they get invested in the project, they get really excited about seeing the animals instead of being fearful about seeing the animals. They're out looking for the animals, and it's kind of like a scavenger hunt a little bit. And so we'd like to see how can we improve the accuracy of the observation rate of iNaturalist or citizen science data. And that's another future goal of the project.
Oh, before I let you go, I got to ask a little bit. I want to ask just about your office here. You got some nice animals, stuffed animals on display. I noticed one, which was a snowy owl, which is, it catches everybody's attention wherever you go, anywhere. But there's a couple other animals. Tell me a little bit about the animals you have in your office and why you have those particular animals.
Yeah. Well, the snowy owl I inherited from a retired professor's office. And I got that just because it's such a majestic mount, and it is really neat. Like you said, it catches people's eye and attention. It's just neat to have them in there, have that animal in there. There's a prairie chicken in there, and so I did my master's project on Atwaters and greater prairie chickens. And then when I came to Wisconsin, that was one of the first research projects I worked on, was the greater prairie chicken population here in Wisconsin. So that's an animal kind of near and dear to my heart. And then the other animal in there is a hooded merganser. And that's just no sentimental reason or special reason. It was just, I think actually that was in the office when I moved here and took this job. So I think I've just kept it in there.
You're gonna get a fox anytime, a red fox anytime soon?
Maybe I should. Yeah, I should get a red fox and a coyote in there for sure. But
it'd be good for the road show.
It would be. My office, I'm running out of room though for animals. So, but yeah, maybe that'd be fun.
Cool. Anything else that you want to mention about the project or what you're doing? Yeah,
I think if people are interested, we have a Facebook page for this project, and you do not have to have a Facebook account. It's an open Facebook page. So if you are interested in seeing what we're doing, you can just Google UW Urban Canid Project. So that's Canid, CANID as in Delta Project. We have a website. You can find that on the Google UW Urban Canid Project. And then if you want to look at iNaturalist, you can find our off our website, you can find the iNaturalist page, and you can find also, we have a lot of people ask, what can we do? And we do have a gift account set up through the UW Foundation. So if people are interested in donating to our project, any money that people donate is tax deductible, and you'll get a certificate from the UW Foundation indicating that. And all the money we collect through that gift account is used only on our fox and coyote project. It's not used for anything other than fox and coyote. So that's it. And the last thing is kind of another project, since we talked a little bit about urban wildlife, is we've got a website. It's called urbanwildlifeproject.wisc.edu, and that website is dedicated to helping people create and enhance and manage habitat to benefit urban wildlife.
Thanks to David for the interesting conversation. That snowy owl in his office is definitely cool, by the way. Make sure to subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. If you're liking the show, please write us a review. Also, you can stay in the loop about the pod by visiting wispod.com and following the show on Twitter at WisPodcast and on Facebook at the Wisconsin Podcast. Cheers.